You, Rachel. Yep. So I work with Rachel in the Farming Countryside program in DEFRA, and allow me to just say as well, thank you very much all for coming along today. I'm just going to give a really quick overview of why we're doing this scheme and a little bit about how it works, and then just a really quick summary application process, and then we'll throw over to others to get into the meat around planning. So just briefly, why are we doing a slurry infrastructure grant, and why are we putting lots of emphasis on tackling pollution from slurry? I'm sure many of you are more than familiar with this, so I won't go over it in lots of detail. But slurry management in the UK is a significant issue. When done well, it can be a really useful asset on farms to support crop growth and soil health. But when managed badly, it is a major cause of water and air pollution across the country, which has a particular bearing on protected sites and vulnerable species. Nationally, investment in slurry infrastructure and practices associated with slurry management hasn't necessarily kept pace with farming practices, and that's something that we're really focused on in DEFRA in supporting farmers to change and to transition towards more sustainable practice. Many farmers are quite familiar with what they need to do and the investments they need to make. It's the getting the financial and practical steps in place that we've been trying to do to try and support them to do that. We go to the next slide, please. Why we care about this nationally? Agriculture is a major contributor to 3 major pollutants that we're trying to tackle to meet some of our environmental outcomes. So is agriculture the main source of ammonia emissions, which can particularly harm vulnerable species and protected sites, and there's also a major contributor towards nitrate and phosphate pollution when excess nutrients enters watercourses and the water table. Go to the next slide, please. So that's a big motivation for why we decided to introduce Slurry Infrastructure Grant, which is one scheme we offer alongside a number of other things in DEFRA's farming programme and the environmental land management schemes and other grants to try and help farmers improve their nutrient management practices. But we're going to focus today on the Slurry Infrastructure Grant. We just launched round 2 of the scheme yesterday, but round 1 is still very much live with round 1 applicants still going through their application process. So what does the scheme do? So the scheme is there to help farmers invest in future-proof slurry infrastructure to help combat some of those issues we just talked about. So improving water quality and air quality, reducing greenhouse gas contributions, and also helping them make better use of organic nutrients and hopefully reducing use of artificial fertilizers in the process. Through the scheme, farmers can get grants to improve, expand, replace and or cover slurry stores to reach what we call the grant storage requirements. So there are legal requirements where you need a specific level of storage, which we'll touch on later, but the scheme takes any grant applicant beyond those legal minimums. So 6 months in the first round, cattle and pig farms. We've actually changed that for round 2. So that cattle farmers still get 6 months, 8 months though for pig farmers, and that's based on feedback, particularly from the pig sector, that they need more storage capacity to comply with some of the new rules around farm rules for water and better managing their nutrients, particularly if they've got a small land bank. As a further condition of the scheme, and this is going to be important, some of the stuff we go on to talk about later on, all applicants must fit any grant funded stores, so those that are getting grants to expand or replace or build new, with impermeable covers, which are the covers that offer the greatest amount of ammonia abatement unless they're doing a suitable alternative, so using a slurry bag or using acidification treatment, which also lowers the pH of slurry to minimise ammonia loss. In round 1, you could only get covers for as part of building new or expanding existing stores. From round 2, we'll also allow farmers to get grants to cover existing stores that they're not otherwise touching, again to try and maximise that ammonia abatement. If we could go to the next slide, please. To try and drive environmental outcomes and maintain those through the scheme, we've attached some important conditions to applications, and these are the sort of standard conditions that everyone going in for a grant will have to fulfil that might be a bit different to just a standard project that you might see through planning for a slurry store. So the first one is that everyone has to plan their slurry storage requirement based on their existing livestock numbers and there's a condition that they must not fall below the slurry storage grant requirements for the duration of their grant funding agreements. That's a 5-year period after they complete the project, and that means that if they make any adjustments to animal numbers or any adjustment to the farming system, they'll need to make changes to their slurry storage system to make up for that as well. That's there as to try and prevent unmitigated intensification, which could of course lead to further nutrients being lost in the environment. Second one is that they must keep their grant funded slurry store covered. There is no national requirement to have slurry stores covered at the moment, but through the grant scheme we can add an explicit condition that farmers do that and that they keep them covered for the duration of the grant funding agreement unless they are maintaining the cover or the store. They must also produce and use a nutrient management plan based on up-to-date soil sampling, which is really at the core of good nutrient management practice. It's a practice that all farmers who are producing or using organic nutrients and fertilizers should be doing. This is making that a standard condition to be really clear that they need to be basing their practice on nutrient management planning. And also because we're offering separators as well, which is a particular piece of equipment that farmers can use to divide the slurry into a liquid and more solid fraction. We've set out best practice they need to follow for that as well, but that's not possibly as relevant for this group, though in short it means that there's environmental safeguards that they need to follow when managing separated slurry as well. If those conditions aren't followed, the Rural Payments Agency can remove the grant funding, which acts as a major financial disincentive for them not to follow those. And we have audit checks to make sure that these conditions are being followed. We could go to the next slide, please. As I said at the beginning of this quick intro, so this is a major priority for DEFRA. We're investing around 200 million in this grant scheme and our small grant scheme to help livestock farmers tackle pollution from slurry. The first round of the scheme was really highly subscribed, so we had about 1,200 applications, of which we shortlisted about 374 or so. And what we're working with them now is to try and get as many of those projects completed as quickly as possible, so that in the rounds that are coming up, we can get even more projects built. The second round is going to be more than twice the size of round one, so we announced that yesterday. We've got about 74 million available in that round. And we hope to be able to fund many more projects through that, and we're inviting many more through once the online checker for the scheme closes. So it's really important that we're pushing out as many messages as possible to farmers who are applying for the scheme to think carefully about planning permission, to put in the steps that they need to do to get through planning and provide as much information as possible, which we're going to go on to soon. But that's just a bit of context about the scale of the scheme. Just a little bit about that map on the right-hand side. In round one, we prioritised projects. There are a smaller number of protected sites. In the second round, depending on the amount of demand we get, we're going to use a similar approach. So if the scheme is highly oversubscribed, we will prioritise grant projects in areas that we've identified as needing the most urgent action to reduce pollution from slurry. So those are protected sites with pressures for water quality and ammonia as well. And you can see that map on the right hand side. There is a scenario where actually we can invite forward many more projects than on that map, in which case we will expand those areas. Similarly, if the scheme is very, very highly subscribed, we will narrow the focus to some of those darker, higher priority areas. So that gives you a sense of where some of the demand for the next round might be, noting those caveats that we might go wider than that. We could go forward a couple of slides. I will just talk through very briefly the application process before going on to others. So given the nature of slurry storage, there is a high risk product that farmers will be handling. There is quite a serious application process that goes with the scheme to try and make sure that farmers are building the right projects in the right places and that they're going to lead to those environmental outcomes that we talked about earlier. So there's a 3-stage application process. We've made this more explicit for the second round. In the first round, the sort of 2 stages on the right were blended together, but from round 2 and 3, this would be really clearly split into 3 stages. So just open today, we have our online checker where essentially farmers submit some basic information about what they want. We then look at how many projects we can invite forward, which we'll do early in the new year. Applicants then need to do a slurry store location design check, which is really at the core of the scheme to make sure we get the right outcomes. William's going to talk about that shortly. And then we have the final stage, which is the Rural Payments Agency will make some final checks that the project can be viably built, that it's affordable, etc. And there's some interim deadlines there that you can see for round 2, some of which are sort of quite sharp deadlines. So that September 2024 deadline for farmers to submit their slurry store location check, we've done that to make sure that people are getting on with the plan of their project and giving enough time to get planning permission. So you can see that longer deadline on the right hand side. These are not you need to wait for these dates. We're encouraging any applicant to get on with it as soon as they can, but just to say those are the deadlines that they need to submit things by. And then throughout the journey as well, applicants can also get free advice from catchment sensitive farming, which tries to drive wider behavioural change, and Jonathan's going to talk about that shortly. I will pass over, in fact, to Jonathan now, who's going to talk about the broad advice that is being offered as part of the scheme.
Good afternoon, Jonathan Skidmore. I work in catchment sensitive farming in the National Operations team. Just a quick overview of catchment sensitive farming for those who aren't familiar with it. It's a partnership between DEFRA, Natural England, Forestry Commission and the Environment Agency. We have a network of around 100 catchment sensitive farming advisors who are part of the partnership and employed by Natural England. Catchment sensitive farming has been on the go since 2006 and it's recently expanded, and we have 100% national coverage across England. Catchment sensitive farming advisors, used to be called catchment sensitive farming officers, now advisors, work on a voluntary basis with priority farms. We understand local pollution issues and we lead farmers towards proven mitigation practices that protect water, air and soil. Bit of context, nearly 20,000 farms, that's around 34% of England's total farmland, have received advice from a catchment sensitive farming advisor. Of that, there's been 155,000 advice recommendations, and they could be on issues to do with reducing slurry volumes, soil analysis, etc., reducing poaching of livestock, etc. We have a robust monitoring and evaluation programme, which is led by our colleagues at the Environment Agency. Through our auditing programme, of those 155,000 recommendations, we've deemed recently that 84,000, which is 54%, have been acted on, and that's important that when catchment sensitive farming gives advice to farmers, it is acted on. As a result of that, again, the Environment Agency monitoring, this is attributable to CSF advice, shows that since 2006, nitrogen levels in watercourses have reduced by 4%, phosphorus levels in watercourses by 8%, and there's been a 12% reduction in sediment. Obviously, a lot more work to do. So CSFAs, catchment sensitive farming advisors, build trust with farmers. It's about establishing those long-term relationships to identify high-risk farming activities and suggest practical and realistic options which will result in water and air pollution. Our advice is voluntary, but much of the advice we give have clear business benefits for the farmers as well. Hence, we have a good uptake of our advice. Advice is targeted to those farms where intervention will have the greatest impact, particularly where behavioural change and capital investment will contribute towards the Environmental Improvement Plan Apex goals of plants and wildlife. That's a bit of context. With SIG Round 1, as Tom mentioned, 374 thereabouts applications invited to full application. They were contacted by CSF and offered a slurry management visit. 74% of those who were offered advice took up a visit. The visits are optional and not a condition of the grant. So we haven't visited every applicant, but we visited 74%. And those visits will vary in duration and many will require return visits as well. And we're discussing slurry management across the chain. In many instances, a lack of slurry storage has been a blocker to wider behavioural changes of slurry management across the farm. So CSF very much welcomes the Slurry Infrastructure Grant and the benefits benefits to air, water and soil are very wide. But CSFAs will also be talking about livestock nutrition, livestock housing, and management of open yard areas, slurry storage, of course, and also those spreading and nutrient management practices. We very much see it as a slurry management chain, and there's measures across that chain which can really help air and water. For SIG Round 2, as you know, opened yesterday. Once again, all applicants will be offered advice, and they are encouraged, again, it's not compulsory, they are encouraged to take that offer up. It's not all about visits. CSF also does a series of newsletters. We do workshop type events, what we call one-to-many events, on-farm walks, etc., to upskill farmers and encourage those behavioural changes which shall result in cleaner air and water. Moving specifically onto sort of SIG going forward this year, within each river basin district, we have an appointed CSF slurry lead, and they will be a key liaison point with the Natural England planning advisors on any applications which have the potential to become high risk. The purpose of these discussions between CSF and the planning advisors will be to enable good decisions, optimising the potential for SIG, while ensuring that any risks to sensitive sites are adequately managed. Thank you.
So over to myself, William Cruikshank, Environment Agency. I work in our head office, looking after the regulation and activity on the ground with agriculture. And we are highly supportive of this grant scheme. Good slurry management is good for managing diffuse pollution to water and equally to air. And there are some quite significant and stringent requirements within regulation around storage and application of nutrients. And you need to have the right storage to be able to do the job properly. So enabling farmers to have the right storage is a real positive for us. Within the scheme, we have a role in making sure that what we are giving money out for is the right things. So we are here specifically to help DEFRA ensure that happens. We do a number of assessments of the applications as they come through, making sure the information that is coming through is correct. Most of this work is done through a remote sensing team, using our remote imaging, etc., around what is out there, and using calculations to work out what's going on. So specifically, we check up on whether the stores are of the right size for the number of livestock on the farm and how much slurry is being generated. We check on the location of the stores to make sure they are legally compliant with the requirements around potential impacts on water. We're also looking at existing stores, because existing stores can be part of the bid and part of the requirement for storage size. So we will look at the existing creatures that are out there. And a map of the farmyard area so we understand what's going on. And we won't pass these things until we are happy that they are going to be legally compliant, that they are going to do the job that is required of a store. So I think, from your perspective as planners, you can be confident that we have done the checks that make sure these things are delivering improved slurry management and therefore improvements to water and air quality, that they are legally compliant, and that they are fit for purpose and doing the job. We've worked very closely with Natural England on modelling the potential benefits that can be achieved and how much reduction in releases to air and water can be achieved, and together we're happy to be able to recommend supported planning around any scheme that has made it through the checks that we put in place. Thank you.
Yeah, next one, please. Thank you. So back to planning permission then. So what have we been told already by farmers and by local planning authorities? We get a lot of information from the National Farmers Union and directly from farmers through catchment sensitive farming, through the Environment Agency, and also lots of correspondence where people have written to their MPs. And so we've got quite a bit of data about farmers' experience of the process. The main things that come up are the habitats regulations don't really support incremental improvements. There's always going to be a residual impact of pollution from slurry, even as a result of these improvement projects. That scale assessment is very difficult to pass. This is the air quality assessment, and it's to do with the thresholds of protected sites that might be nearby. Farmers don't always know what information they need to provide upfront, and might be asked for more information at multiple points as a result of the planning consultations, and that leads to delays. So then we also went and spoke to a couple of local planning authorities to sort of hear about what they're seeing in their processing of planning applications. So one of the things that they told us was that some staff aren't familiar with slurry management, and in particular the regulations that underpin it. And that might be because they just don't get a lot of slurry store applications, and that might be because they are contractors, because we know that local authorities are very under-resourced at the moment. It might also be that planning authorities don't have the necessary ecological knowledge and rely heavily upon Natural England, because we know that authority ecologists have diminished over time. And we also hear on the flip side of the evidence requirements argument from farmers that applications could be much more detailed from the start, which would help to reduce delays if all evidence was provided up front. And we've also taken on board a bit of criticism that DEFRA has looked a little bit disjointed in our advice across the group, reflecting the differences in our statutory duties across the agencies. Next slide, please. So what have we done about it so far? So last autumn, when round one launched, we published the first set of guidance you can see, so the Slurry Infrastructure Grant and Habitats Regulations Assessment, as a bit of information for local planning authorities. That goes into detail about what we're trying to achieve, why we've targeted these stores near protected sites, and the benefits we're trying to achieve there in terms of reducing nutrient pollution, and other measures that the government are taking to reduce nutrient pollution to protected sites. We then had those conversations and got more evidence, had those conversations with local authorities, and what we found was that it would be very useful to provide a bit of a checklist of evidence that farmers could easily provide, and that local authorities might be able to use to make decisions about grant-funded stores. So firstly, they really need to know that the store is funded through the grant, because then those conditions that Tom talked about apply. It's really important that Natural England also get that information when the application goes to planning consultation. They need to know about what the purpose of the store is, evidence of how many livestock are on the farm, and that's not always provided. And then also about how the farm are managing their nutrients on the site, and how the slurry will be used going forward as a fertiliser and making use of the nutrients. And also soil evidence to underpin that is no older than 5 years, because that's what's in the regulations. And we were also asked to provide a bit more information about what the regulations are that underpin slurry storage and slurry management, and the Environment Agency's role in regulating those. So we sent a joint letter from DEFRA, EA and Natural England, back in spring, and we have published those on .gov.uk in the same place where you'll find all of the slurry guidance, and there's a page specifically for local authorities. There will also be more information coming in the near future, that I think Patrick's going to mention. Aside from guidance, we've also been doing a lot of work together internally to come up with some strategic solutions. So I will hand over to Patrick.
Thank you, Rachel, and good afternoon. I'm Patrick McKernan, Deputy Director in Natural England, overseeing our planning work. And as people have highlighted on the talk so far, Natural England has a key role in the planning side for the Slurry Infrastructure Grant, because if it's involving new builds, such as a new slurry store, it requires planning permission. And Natural England is a statutory consultee in the planning process where applications might affect a protected site, and I'll come to define those. But the first thing to say, and William from EA and Jonathan, my colleague, has also highlighted, Natural England supports the scheme for all of its environmental benefits, and particularly because it's being targeted at improving air quality and water quality for protected sites. Another said, we're a consultee, so we must be consulted by local authorities where there may be impacts to protected sites. And what we're specifically talking about is sites of special scientific interest, and what are called the habitat sites in the National Planning Policy Framework, but special areas of conservation, the special protection areas, and Ramsar sites. I think William has highlighted this as well. We work closely with them on the Environment Agency on the modelling of the scheme. Now, the reason we've done this is that we were seeking to have, particularly for round 2, a more streamlined process that would enable us to advise that in the vast majority of cases, we consider there would be low environmental risks. But to do that, we need to sort of an assessment of the whole scheme England-wide. And we used to think farm scoper to do this. I'm not going to go into the detail of that today, but we're going to be writing to all local authorities soon, and we'll set out or we'll provide a link to that and set out that advice when that letter is sent out. And when Natural England provides its planning responses, we'll also include that link so that local authorities have access to that evidence base that's underpinning our advice. And that analysis, it's demonstrated there will be a scheme level net reductions in water and air pollution. And that's a really critical thing for us. So, as I said, we expect in the majority of cases we will be able to send standard responses. And this is because, first of all, because of the aims of the scheme, it has been targeted at protected sites to reduce pollution. And these are important ways in which our responses to SIG slurry storage may differ from those where the SIG is not involved. It's because of the scheme itself and what it's promoting, what it's funding, and this wide analysis we've undertaken of the impacts of the scheme being in place. So the reduction in pollution shown by the analysis of the scheme gives us that confidence that the majority of the applications are likely to be lower risk. Criteria of the scheme, and Rachel has set that out, those things that will be expected to be included, that checklist of evidence, the nutrient management plan, and so on, the regulatory side that the Environment Agency have to sign off. All of that as a package is what gives us the confidence around the Slurry Infrastructure Grant. However, we are statutory consultee on potential impacts. We can't rule out that there might be some impacts on a small number of cases. And so where that is the case, we'll write to local authority and say that further assessment will be required. And by further assessment, that usually is referring to the habitats regulations for Europeans, those habitat sites. But we will advise on that. But we're anticipating that will be in a small number of cases and not the majority. But we do have to see the applications coming in. So we have to have that ability to provide the advice where in certain conditions, it might be a higher risk. And that might involve, say, where there's a particularly complex planning application involving, say, new buildings, plans to significantly increase the size of a herd, potentially moving a slurry store near a protected site, which is not to say that necessarily those would be reasons for not allowing it, but we think those would be circumstances where further assessment would be needed. So, as I said, we'll be writing to local authorities to update them across England on our overall approach. And that information will be, I think, will be available on gov.uk as well, and we'll provide a link to that. And the last thing to highlight, as Rachel's already said, it would be really important for Natural England to know if an application is in relation to the Slurry Infrastructure Grant, because otherwise we're not able to easily understand whether these requirements apply. We'll have to treat it as if it isn't, or we'll have to find out, and it will slow down the process. What we want to do is streamline things here and give as quick a response as we can to local authorities so that farmers can achieve these grants within those challenging timeframes. So that's the overarching aim here. But we'll be putting that advice in our letter. And I thought the last thing I'd just highlight, we talked here about prior approvals earlier, just for local authority to note, and this will be in our guidance, that permitted development, there are certain requirements related to the habitats regulations, which are set out in planning practice guidance, but we'll highlight what that is and what you need to be aware of, and what applicants need to be aware of in terms of permitted development and HOAs. So that's all I wanted to say. Thank you for the opportunity for representing Natural England today.
So is that the point where we press stop?